If the South End is Boston's cradle of gentrification, it's also known as a place where social conflict has given way to a culture of diversity. If you read the observations of our guest in her book, The Good Neighbors, you would realize that culture is a tool with surgical refinement or with a hard edge. The author is a professor of political science at the University Saint-Denis, Paris 8. Along with doing her fieldwork in the South End, she also studied at Harvard. We'd like to welcome Sylvie Tissot. Thank you very much for being with us, Sylvie.
Thanks a lot, Chris, for having me.
First of all, talk about why you even chose to study this neighborhood.
Well, actually, the reason why I went to the South End to do fieldwork was because a professor in France was doing a comparison between the South End in Boston and a neighborhood called La Goutte d'Or in Paris. That's how everything started, and I did some interviews for her project and wrote part of her report, and then I started my own project.
Well, one of the paradoxes about the South End is that this is a neighborhood that went from squalor and disrepute to a showcase of Victorian architecture, cultural refinement. A lot of people were displaced, and yet there's this embrace of diversity, or a seeming embrace. What did you find?
Oh, wow. So the book is a case study of gentrification, and I'm trying to provide some explanation of this process of gentrification. But my angle is also a study of a class culture, of a lifestyle and of a culture of a specific fraction of the upper middle class or the upper class, and of its praise of diversity. And what I found is that it's a value which is deeply ambivalent. On one hand, people to what we call the gentrifier who move to the South End are really dedicated to diversity, are against segregation. They enjoy the mix of people along race, class, age lines. And at the same time, they are as eager as promoting this diversity as they are anxious to control this diversity.
So how do they control or contain it?
Well, there are many ways, and what I tried to do is go back to the 60s, because to me it's where everything started, in an era where conflicts were so intense in the South End. And back then, in the 60s until now, there's been a very intense mobilization of these newcomers, in neighborhood association, in the historical society. And with people having different values from, radical or liberal values to conservative values for the historical society. But what I describe in the book is the emergence of a local elite with specific values, with a specific legitimacy, and with practices that sometimes make some population invisible, especially on public spaces.
Well, one interesting example, this came later along the way, is the Peters Park dog section. And some things about this are very nice. I like dogs too, and it's a place where different types of people can socialize. There are gay people and there are straight people. They're out taking care of the park. So some people might say, isn't that a good thing?
Well, I have a chapter or part of a chapter on dogs in the book, and that might seem trivial, especially for a sociological book, but I think it's not. I analyzed pet ownership as a social marker, and that can be revealed in the dog species that these, white upper middle class people have, which is not the species of the dog that people living in public housing have. I can see that in the accessories that people buy, that the amount of money that people spend on dogs. But what I also analyzed, and to me the dog phenomenon is interesting because of that, is that through dogs, people have inscribed their social norms on public spaces. By walking their dog, by creating a new space in a public park, which is quite homogeneous. And I don't know if it's good or bad, and actually I don't know if it's my role to say it's good or bad, but what I wanted to explain is, the mix of exclusion and inclusion that goes with this kind of mobilization, in that case from pet owners who, of course, need places for the dog, and that's quite natural. But what I'm trying to look at is the kind of social norms that are involved in that process.
I want to come back to the phenomenon of culture here, because this isn't just about the arts per se, because we're talking about something that includes quality of life. Take me back from the historical to the historical society and the movement against the downscale bars.
Yeah. So this campaign started in 1975, this campaign against the downscale bars, and it was led by some people active in neighborhood association, sometimes in the historical society as well. And what they wanted to do is close these bars because what they said was, some of them were saying that they wanted to fight alcoholism and some crime elements. But I also see it as a way of marking a public space, which back then was occupied by low-income people, often men, often migrants living in boarding houses, going to cafeteria to eat, to bars. And I see this campaign as one element in all these mobilizations to mark public space with new norms, which required to erase what had existed previously. And that's, I think, has to be questioned. It's not only a way of, let's open new bars because we like upscale restaurants, which is, fine, but it's open new places because other places were deeply problematic for these newcomers.
One of the things I've seen already in reactions to your book, there are people in the South End who say, look, we have a lot of low-income housing, we have a lot of places here still for people in recovery, and, frankly, we put up with more of this than most other people in Boston do, so why pick on us?
I'm not sure I would say that I'm picking on them, and I hope they are not taking it like that, but that's open to discussion. I think if, is putting up with others really something satisfactory? I'm not sure. Of course, diversity means accepting others, but living with others in a neighborhood doesn't mean that we reduce inequalities, doesn't mean that we reduce discrimination or racism. I think beyond this diversity and this proximity of different groups, inequalities and power relations still exist.
And I know that's one of the other things that are interesting about your book, that contradiction between being close to people but being totally disconnected from them.
Yeah, disconnected, but this had changed from the 60s until now. And in the 60s and the 70s, some gentrifiers would fight with low-income people and Black people, Latino people, for instance, against the highway project. So there were common battles, but those battles have disappeared. And now the relations that you see between these well-off people and low-income people are through philanthropy, which is, relations, but coming with a lot of, distance.
Of course, another thing that's changed is that transition from a gay population becoming more openly gay, and now we're in the era of gay friendly, which is different.
It is different. Gay friendliness is also part of this embrace of diversity, but with the same ambivalence. Well, that's what I found out. There's no doubt that this population I've studied is very gay-friendly. Some of them go to the gay pride. They've been open to gay people in their neighborhood association, etc. But at the same time, there is also an effort to control the visibility of gay people. And where are gay people visible in the South End? Of course, there are still bars, less than there used to be. But a lot of gay people go to the dog park, often, white, very well-off gay people, having dogs, sometimes sharing the same, family norms that their straight counterparts. And there is some ways of accepting gay on public space and accepting gays on certain conditions, and not every gay, I think.
I was lucky enough maybe to live in other parts of the city where we had these big parks with all kinds of people coming to them, and I read this book and I'm thinking, there's something missing here, the right to the city, that ability to breathe and be around all these different kinds of people as equals. I have a feling there's not enough of that in this neighborhood. At least you didn't think there was enough.
Enough public space?
Yes.
Sure, public space is necessary. To have For
But
instance,
access to that public space too.
access to this public space, you're right, because some little park in the south end, sorry, are also controlled by some neighborhood association who have a say in what kind of populations can, access to the parks. And there are public space, and public space is important in the sense that it's, public by definition. Everybody can go in, but in Peter's Park, of course, you have a diversity of people, but in this diversity, you have also micro segregations, and I think the dog run, in some ways, illustrates this phenomenon of, diversity and micro places where very similar people, get together.
We have just a little time here. The translation is published by Verso Books, and tomorrow night you're going to be at the Harvard Bookstore near Harvard Square in Cambridge. So give us the time and tell us a little bit about what you're going to be doing there.
So it's 7:00 tomorrow evening, and Jim Rebel, who is a famous historian of Boston, will be there to lead the discussion. And I hope a lot of people from the South End and elsewhere in Boston will come. And I'm also very happy because as a visiting scholar, I spend a lot of time at Harvard University at the Center for European Studies. So to me, it's great to go to the Harvard Bookstore.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks a lot.
The book is The Good Neighbors, the author, Sylvie Tissot.